They believed $300 was enough to buy my silence. They were gravely mistaken. I didn't want a scene or a showdown. All I needed was my laptop, a firm grasp of intellectual property law, and the fact that they'd spent 5 years ignoring the licenses attached to the very code keeping their systems alive. In the end, their careless dismissal cost them $14 million, a brutal reminder that empires don't run on PowerPoint slides, but on the quiet work of those who build them in the background. My name is Scott Langford. For 9 years, I was the unseen force holding Convergent Systems' digital backbone together. I was the database engineer who kept their enterprise platform stable through 4 acquisitions, endless migrations, and more sleepless nights than I'd care to remember. I never sought the spotlight, no keynotes, no VP title. I was the one they called at 2 a.m. when everything went dark, the person who could untangle a failing distributed transaction across a dozen microservices with one eye still closed, and I was perfectly fine with that. Let the career climbers fight for corner offices. I was after something far more valuable, clean, reliable systems that just worked. The day it all fell apart began like any other. Fog clung to the Boston office windows as I sipped my 4th espresso, scanning overnight batch logs. The dashboard was quiet, everything green. My schemas weren't pretty, but they handled 50 million daily transactions without a hiccup. "Scott, got a minute?" I looked up to see Edward Kingsley looming near my desk, flashing that rehearsed executive grin. The new CTO, less than 2 months in, fresh off a Yale MBA and 0 real engineering experience, hired to transform the tech org. The announcement had scared half our senior engineers into quietly dusting off their resumes. "Sure," I said, closing my terminal. He stayed standing, textbook dominance play from some leadership playbook. "I've been reviewing our database architecture," he said. "Your design choices are curious." In 23 years of software work, I'd learned curious was code for "you're in trouble." "The systems perform," I replied calmly. "Sub 50 minutes query times, 99 to 8% uptime this year. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe so you never miss another powerful story, and let me know your thoughts on today's one in the comments. I read every message." "Performance isn't everything," he countered, shifting on his polished Italian shoes. "Your schema is hard to follow, custom-stored procedures, odd indexing. We need to tackle this technical debt." Technical debt, the favorite buzzword of executives who've never written a line of production code. His predecessors had used it too, right up until they realized my so-called debt was the only thing stopping total collapse. "Which parts specifically concern you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Honestly, all of it," he said. "But that's not why I'm here." He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times. "This expense from last month, $300 for a database monitoring tool. You used your personal card. No approval." My stomach dropped. It was the query analyzer I'd bought myself after procurement dragged its feet for 2 months. I'd plugged it into our monitoring stack, and it had already averted 3 major outages. I submitted the expense. It's pending approval. "Not anymore," he said, smile tightening. "Using personal funds for company tools violates policy. Bypassing procurement, introducing security risks, financial impropriety. It's a monitoring utility. We needed it now. Procurement moves at a glacial pace." "Doesn't matter." He slipped the phone away. "This is grounds for immediate termination. Security will walk you out. Your things will be mailed." The words hung in the air like smoke. 9 years gone. Not for failing performance. Not for misconduct. Just $300 and a new boss desperate to flex his authority. "What about my reimbursement?" I asked, already knowing. "Denied. Unauthorized spending is your problem." I stood slowly, mechanically gathering my notebook and coffee mug. Around me, the office buzzed on. Keyboards clacking, someone laughing by the water cooler. No one realized a career was just quietly executed. "Badge and laptop," Edward said, holding out his hand. I unclipped my badge, unplugged my laptop, handed them over, one deliberate motion at a time. Inside, something cold and focused began to boot up, like a silent process launching in the background. "Anything else?" I asked. He was already walking away. Security's waiting downstairs. I returned to my desk one last time and picked up my small cactus, the same one I'd carried through 5 office moves. Tough, steady, like me. Scott? Amanda from HR passed by, tablet in hand. Everything. Okay? Just heading out, I said. Take care, Amanda. She frowned, puzzled, but I was already heading for the elevators. A young security guard, barely old enough to have worked half as long as I'd been there, appeared at my side. Sorry about this, he mumbled. Not your fault, I said. The elevator ride down 26 floors felt endless. By the time we hit the lobby, that icy calculation inside me had sharpened into clear intent. They'd just traded 9 years of deep institutional knowledge for $300. They had no idea what they'd actually bought. Outside, the fog had thinned. I stood on the sidewalk, cactus under my arm, and pulled out my phone, scrolled to a name, Malia Brennan, my law school roommate, now an IP and software licensing specialist. Hey, stranger, she answered after 3 rings. Long time. What's up? Got time for lunch? Need to talk through some licensing issues. Sounds serious. You okay? I glanced back at Convergent's gleaming tower. It will be. We met at one of those ultra-trendy downtown spots. Exposed pipes, reclaimed wood, chairs that looked like they'd been rescued from a demolition site. Malia was already seated, sharp in a navy suit that cost more than my monthly car payment. You look like your dog just got hit by a bus, she said as I sat. Close. Got fired this morning. Her eyebrows shot up. Convergent finally imploded? New CTO made an example out of me over a $300 expense. Jesus, after how long? 9 years, she whistled. Wrongful termination? Massachusetts is at will. They could have fired me for mismatched socks. I gripped my water glass, letting its chill steady me. But that's not why I called. I opened my personal laptop, pulled up my GitHub repos, each one timestamped, every commit meticulously logged. These are database libraries I built on my own time, with my own gear, I explained. I integrated them into Convergent systems over the years because they needed fixes, and I had solutions. Malia scanned the license files. MIT here. Apache there. Wait, she paused. This one's custom. Wrote it myself 4 years ago, I said. Free for personal or academic use, but requires a commercial license for any for-profit company. And Convergent's running this in production everywhere. I pulled up logs, metrics, pipeline records. I've tracked every use, every query, every deployment pulling from my repos. She leaned back, a slow grin spreading. You paranoid genius, you've been ready for this. Not ready, just careful. I learned early. Companies love using your work but hate paying for it, so I made the terms unambiguous, even if no one bothered to read them. How much are we talking? I showed her the numbers, usage volume, system count, 4 years of deployment. Conservative estimate, 3.2 million in owed licensing. Fees. She nearly choked on her iced tea. That's not conservative. It is. If you factor in the chaos of pulling my code out, every system using it would crash or need rebuilding, and they can't do that, because only I truly understand how it all fits together. Oh, they grasp the architecture well enough, I said. They just can't rebuild it, and that's a world of difference. Malia studied me across the table, her expression shifting. This isn't really about the money, is it? The dollars are just how we put a number on 9 years of midnight emergency calls, of patching systems together with sheer will and duct tape logic, of being invisible until everything's on fire, then suddenly indispensable, only to vanish again once it's fixed. And now, she added with a wry smile, they've made you impossible to ignore. Their mistake. She pulled out her tablet and started typing. First step, document everything, every commit, every integration, every time they pulled from your repos. Already done. I slid a flash drive toward her. 4 years of logs, Git history, CI/CD configs, even Slack threads where they discussed using my libraries. She paused. How did you? I built their monitoring stack, I said simply. I know where every byte lives. She tucked the drive away. This is going to be fun. Then her tone turned serious. But Scott, once we move forward, there's no going back. You'll be burning every bridge you've ever built in that company. They struck the match the moment they walked me out over $300, I said. I'm just deciding where the fire spreads. We spent the next 3 hours laying out our strategy. Malia would vet every legal detail to make our case bulletproof. I'd keep watching their systems from the outside, tracking usage through telemetry I'd quietly built into the open source tools they relied on. We'd let them stew in the eats, quiet, unraveling. Let them feel the consequences before they realized what was costing them. How long do we wait? She asked as we got up to leave. Long enough for it to hurt, I said. Let them feel the void before they understand the price. That's ruthless, she said. That's business, I replied. They taught me that lesson this morning. I drove home through Boston's usual overcast haze. My apartment felt oddly hollow at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday. Too still, too silent. I set my rescued cactus on the windowsill and opened my laptop out of habit. First stop, Convergence public status page, all green, databases humming along, my code running flawlessly. Even as HR finalized my exit paperwork, the irony wasn't lost on me. But I knew that calm wouldn't last. Edward had no clue what he'd inherited. To him, my systems looked like a mess, a tangle of technical debt. But it wasn't debt. It was resilience forged over 9 years of real-world chaos. He saw disorder. I saw a carefully balanced Jenga tower, and he was already pulling the wrong blocks. I switched to my private monitoring dashboard, one hosted on infrastructure Convergent never knew existed. Embedded in my open-source libraries were harmless telemetry hooks, usage stats, error rates, performance trends, not spyware, just the kind of data any responsible maintainer would track. Within hours, the first cracks appeared. A junior dev pushed a cleanup commit, stripping out what they thought were unnecessary query hints. Classic Edward influence, prioritize clean code over code that actually works. Query time spiked, subtly, but enough for me to notice. Worse, they'd accidentally introduced a race condition that would only trigger under heavy load. Give it a week or two, and they'd have their first real outage. I closed the laptop, made dinner, grilled chicken, roasted veggies, a glass of red, and ate alone, watching the city lights shimmer through fogged glass. My phone buzzed intermittently, texts and calls from old teammates who'd heard the news. I let them go to voicemail. That night, I slept deeper than I had in months. No pagers, no dread, just the quiet certainty that, miles away in their gleaming tower, my absence was already costing them, silently, steadily. They thought they saved $300. They had no idea what bill was coming due. The next 3 weeks unfolded in eerie calm. I fell into a new rhythm. Morning runs without checking alerts, coffee without bracing for disaster. I even signed up for guitar lessons, something I'd put off for a decade, but I never stopped watching. My dashboard became a front row seat to a slow-motion systems collapse. Empowered by Edward's Modernize Everything mandate, junior engineers kept improving my code, renaming variables for readability, deleting comments they called noise, restructuring modules for elegance. Each change seemed harmless, alone. Together, they were a death by 1,000 cuts. The first major failure hit on a Tuesday. I was at the gym when my phone pinged, an automated alert from an old monitoring hook, payment cluster deadlock, not my problem anymore, but muscle memory kicked in. I found a cafe, pulled up their public status, still green, of course, and dug deeper. The deadlock sat in a module that interfaced with one of my custom transaction handlers. Someone had cleaned up what looked like redundant lock logic. Except it wasn't redundant. It handled rare concurrency edge cases that only surfaced under specific traffic patterns. By the time they caught on, 4 hours had passed. The payment system crawled at 20% capacity. In my old role, I'd have fixed it in 15 minutes. Now, I sipped a cappuccino and watched their throughput nosedive in real time. They eventually rolled back the change and stabilized things, but not before thousands of failed transactions and the kind of board-level panic that gets CFOs asking hard questions. That evening, Malia called. Saw the news? What news? Convergence stock dropped 3% after reports of payment issues. Unfortunate, I said, rinsing dishes. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that. I'm unemployed, remember? Just enjoying my freedom. You didn't even get severance? They walked me out on the spot. She laughed. You're savoring this way too much. I'm savoring it exactly as much as it's worth. But that outage was just the warm-up. The real disaster came the next week during their quarterly release. I'd built their deployment pipeline 4 years earlier, a clunky, patched-together ballet of servers, test environments, and rollout rules. It wasn't pretty, but it worked across their messy, heterogeneous stack. Edward, of course, had replaced it with a sleek, off-the-shelf solution. Modern, streamlined, and utterly wrong for their reality. The first deploy, simple UI tweak, went fine. The second, involving multiple interdependent services, exploded. Service Alpha launched fine but expected Service Beta's new API, which was still deploying. Service Beta couldn't start because Service Gamma's database migrations hadn't finished. Service Gamma, meanwhile, was stuck waiting for Alpha to free up a connection pool. Circular dependency, total gridlock, the whole platform froze. Back on my balcony with a bourbon, I watched Convergence Tower glow against the Boston skyline. I pictured Edward sweating, engineers hunched over laptops, pizza boxes piling up as the clock ticked past midnight. They'd fix it eventually, roll back, untangle the mess, maybe even learn a lesson, but not before hours of downtime, angry enterprise clients, and board members wondering why their shiny new CTO kept breaking everything he touched. Then, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the corporate prefix. Hello? Scott? It's Brandon, one of the senior DB engineers. We'd worked side by side for 6 years. I know this is awkward, but we're in deep trouble with the deployment pipeline. Sorry to hear that, I said, watching a plane descend toward Logan Airport. Look, I know Edward fired you, but we're completely stuck. The new system's locked up. We can't figure out why. Any chance you could just point us in the right direction? Brandon, I interrupted gently, I don't work there anymore. I understand. But maybe just some guidance? Point us in the correct direction? I felt sympathy for him genuinely. Brandon was an excellent engineer, constrained by management decisions beyond his control. But sympathy doesn't pay bills or restore professional dignity. Check the service dependency graph, I said finally. Look for circular references. And Brandon? Next time Edward decides to fix something that isn't broken, remember this conversation. Scott hung up. Let them figure it out themselves. I'd given them more assistance than they deserved. By morning, they'd resolved the deployment crisis, but the damage was spreading. Technology blogs picked up the story. Convergent Systems suffers second major outage in 3 weeks. Stock price dropped another 2%. LinkedIn exploded with recruiters sensing opportunity, circling Convergent's talent pool like sharks. Malia called that afternoon. Finished reviewing your documentation. This is absolutely airtight. Your licenses are unambiguous. Their usage is comprehensively documented. The terms are legally enforceable. Excellent. When should we proceed? I considered it carefully. Part of me wanted to wait longer, let them dig deeper into the hole. But there was strategic value in striking while they were vulnerable. Monday, I said. Give them the weekend to believe they've stabilized, calculated, strategic. There's a distinction. I spent the weekend preparing, not the legal. Documents. Malia had those handled. I prepared myself mentally. Once we sent the demand letter, there was no turning back. 9 years of professional relationships obliterated, any possibility of a reference destroyed. But then I thought about Edward's smile as he denied my reimbursement, the security guard escorting me out like a criminal, the $300 they thought was worth more than my expertise. Sunday night, I sat at my computer and composed an email to Malia. Brief and simple. Send it. Monday morning arrived cold and drizzling, Boston at its most stereotypical. I made coffee and settled in to observe the unfolding drama. The demand letter would reach their legal department at 9 a.m. sharp, right as everyone settled into their week. I didn't have access to their internal communications anymore, but I could imagine the chain reaction. Legal would read it, panic, forward to the executive suite. Edward would dismiss it as frivolous until someone technical reviewed the claims. Then, genuine panic would set in as they realized how deeply my code was embedded throughout their infrastructure. At 11:14 a.m., my phone rang. Convergence corporate number. "Hello? Please hold for Edward Kingsley." I smiled, faster than anticipated. "Scott," his voice had lost that polished confidence. "I just received a rather disturbing letter from your attorney. Then you should probably have your attorney contact mine. Let's not escalate unnecessarily. I'm confident we can resolve this reasonably." We could have. You chose not to when you terminated me over a legitimate business expense. That's a separate matter. This claim for $3.2 million is based on 4 years of documented commercial usage of my proprietary code. The licensing terms are explicit. You developed that code while employed by us, on my personal time using personal equipment, explicitly retaining ownership. Would you like me to forward the email where your predecessor acknowledged this arrangement? Silence. I could practically hear him grinding his teeth. "This is extortion," he said finally. "This is contract law. You've been using my software commercially without proper licensing. The invoice reflects documented usage. Of course, if you'd prefer to cease using my code immediately, you know we can't do that. Then, I suggest your legal team review the licensing terms and prepare payment. Scott, be reasonable. The company can't simply write a check for $3 million. Should have considered that before you saved $300 on my reimbursement." I hung up. The rest of Monday remained quiet. I knew the storm was brewing inside Convergence headquarters, emergency meetings, frantic code audits, desperate searches for alternatives. But outwardly, they maintained silence. That changed after lunch. Brandon texted, "Holy hell, Scott. Edward's completely losing it. He's ordered us to strip out all your code by end of week." I didn't respond, but I watched my telemetry dashboard with interest. Usage of my libraries actually increased as they spun up additional instances, trying to understand the dependencies. Like scratching a rash, the more they touched it, the worse it became. By Tuesday, the situation had escalated dramatically. Malia forwarded me an email from Convergence legal team disputing our claims, arguing work for hire superseded any personal licensing. Standard corporate intimidation tactics. "How do you want to respond?" she asked. "Send them the complete audit trail, every commit from my personal laptop, every timestamp showing weekend and evening work." And Malia, "Include the communication logs where their engineers explicitly discuss using my personal projects to solve company problems. That should silence them. That's the objective." Wednesday brought the first public consequences. A frustrated junior developer accidentally pushed internal documentation to a public repository. Nothing confidential, but it included architecture diagrams showing how deeply my libraries were integrated throughout their systems. Technology Twitter had a field day. Convergent systems built on engineers' personal projects trended briefly. The stock price, already unstable, dropped another 4%. Edward called again that evening. I let it go to voicemail. "Scott, this is Edward. We need to discuss this situation. The board is extremely concerned. I'm certain we can find a mutually beneficial resolution. Call me back." I deleted the message and poured another bourbon. Thursday became interesting. I woke to find my GitHub repositories flooded with traffic, not from Convergent, but from their competitors. Word had spread about the licensing dispute. Suddenly, everyone wanted to examine code worth $3 million, my inbox filled with inquiries. Startups wanting to license the libraries, recruiters dangling principal architect positions, even several acquisition offers for the intellectual property itself. I forwarded the most promising ones to Malia. Might prove useful during negotiation. "You're diabolical," she replied. "I love it." But the real entertainment came from watching Convergent's attempts to extricate themselves. Their engineering team had split into 2 factions, one trying to reverse engineer my libraries, the other attempting to find commercial replacements. Both were failing spectacularly. The reverse engineering hit obstacles at every turn. My code wasn't deliberately obfuscated, but it represented years of evolution, optimized for their specific requirements. Without understanding the reasoning behind each decision, they couldn't replicate the implementation. The replacement effort was even more entertaining. Commercial solutions existed for some functionality, but none handled Convergent's peculiar requirements. Their architecture had grown around my code like a tree around a fence post. Removing it meant restructuring everything. Friday morning, Malia called early. They capitulated. Really? Complete payment of the invoice plus interest plus legal fees, but they want an ongoing license and your agreement not to publicize the settlement. No, Malia, they pay the invoice. That covers past usage. If they want future usage, that's a separate negotiation entirely. And I make no promises about publicity beyond not violating any legal agreements. That's harsh. That's business. They taught me that principle, remember? She sighed. I'll counter. This is going to become uglier before resolution. She was correct. The next week saw Convergent's public situation deteriorate further. Without my libraries, their deployment pipeline was held together with digital prayers. A botched update took down their customer portal for 7 hours. The board called an emergency session. I knew because Amanda from HR texted me. Edward's in with the board. He looks absolutely terrified. I felt a momentary twinge of sympathy. Then I remembered him standing over my workstation, smiling as he ended my career over $300. The following morning, everything shifted. Malia called at 6:30 a.m., excitement crackling through the connection. They've completely caved. Full payment, no conditions on publicity, and they want to negotiate ongoing licensing. How much? The complete $3.2 million plus another $75,000 in legal fees. I sat down heavily on my couch. It was real. The number I'd calculated, the justice I'd planned, it was actually happening. Scott? You there? I'm here. Just processing everything. There's more. They want to meet in person to discuss ongoing licensing. Edward? No. The board terminated Edward last night, effective immediately. I closed my eyes. Victory should have tasted sweeter, but mostly I felt exhausted, vindicated, but exhausted. Schedule the meeting, I said. But Malia, make it absolutely clear I'm not returning as an employee. If they want my code, they license it like any other vendor. Understood. Scott, you did it. You won, had I? I'd gotten paid, gotten justice, gotten revenge. But I'd also burned my professional home to the ground in the process. Yeah, I said quietly. I won. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I dressed carefully, professional but not corporate, confident but not aggressive. The same building I'd been escorted from weeks ago now welcomed me as a valued partner. The conference room was packed. Board members, the interim CTO, legal counsel, even the CEO joining remotely from San Francisco. They needed my code desperately, and everyone knew it. Mr. Langford, the board chair began. Thank you for meeting with us. We'd like to discuss a long-term arrangement. I listened to their proposal. Annual licensing fee, comprehensive support contract, even a consulting arrangement to help train their engineering team. The numbers were generous. They'd learned the cost of undervaluing expertise the hard way. I appreciate the offer, I said when they finished. But I have significant concerns about Convergent's technical direction. You terminated me for writing code that functioned properly in favor of code that appeared aesthetically pleasing. Why should I believe that philosophy has changed? The interim CTO leaned forward. Because we've learned that lesson painfully. We need stability, not aesthetics. And the $300? The board chair actually smiled slightly. We've reviewed that situation thoroughly. The reimbursement has been approved with interest, and we've updated our procurement policies to prevent such short-sighted decisions in the future. I considered it carefully. The money was excellent, the vindication complete, but something still bothered me. I need one additional thing, I said. A public statement acknowledging that Convergent's infrastructure was built on open-source contributions from its engineers. That innovation comes from empowering developers, not constraining them. They exchanged glances. The CEO cleared his throat over the speakerphone. That's somewhat unusual. So is terminating someone over a $300 expense they incurred to keep your systems operational. Take it or leave it. It took them less than 7 minutes to agree. I signed the licensing agreement that afternoon. Annual fee of $450,000 for unlimited usage of my libraries, plus hourly consulting as needed. The public statement went out the next day, carefully worded but clear in its message. Convergent valued its engineers and their contributions, both official and personal. Edward Kingsley's departure was announced separately, buried in a Friday afternoon press release, pursuing other opportunities, the standard corporate fiction. The technology community connected the dots immediately. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, a co-working space overlooking Boston Harbor, reviewing pull requests for my now officially commercial libraries. The Convergent incident had transformed me into an accidental entrepreneur. Dozens of companies wanted what I'd built, and I was delighted to license it to them. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. Edward Kingsley had updated his status, Chief Technology Officer at Synergy Solutions. I laughed. Synergy was one of my newest clients, already integrating my libraries into their infrastructure. I made a note to send them a particularly thorough invoice. Amanda from Convergent texted, saw Edward's new position. "Did you know?" "I know everything," I replied. "Evil. Prepared. There's a distinction." I turned back to my code, clean, functional, and valued at exactly what it's worth. Outside, Boston's fog had finally cleared, sun streaming through the windows. My cactus thrived on the windowsill, patient and resilient as ever. They'd thought $300 could bury me. Instead, it had liberated me. 3 years have passed since that morning in Edward's presence. Convergent Systems remains a client, one of my most reliable. Actually, their new CTO, promoted from within, someone who understands functionality over aesthetics, sends me birthday cards. We've developed an excellent working relationship, built on mutual respect and clearly defined contracts. My library licensing business has grown beyond my imagination. 37 companies now pay for commercial usage. I've employed 4 developers to help with maintenance and support. We work remotely, set our own schedules, and never quibble over expense reports. Edward Kingsley lasted 8 months at Synergy Solutions. When their systems started experiencing familiar problems, they called me for consultation. I explained, quite professionally, that certain architectural decisions seemed to be causing instability. They thanked me, paid my consulting fee, and Edward's tenure ended shortly thereafter. I hear he's consulting now, leadership coaching for non-technical executives entering technical roles. I hope his clients learn from his mistakes, though I doubt he frames them that way. Malia and I still meet for lunch monthly. She's built her own practice specializing in intellectual property for software engineers. "You started something significant," she told me recently. "Developers are becoming smarter about protecting their work." "Good," I said. "It's long overdue. The $300 query analyzer still runs in my infrastructure, now monitoring dozens of client systems. It's generated hundreds of thousands in value, preventing outages and catching issues before they cascade." I keep the original expense report framed in my office, denied stamped in red, as a reminder. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Edward had simply approved that reimbursement. Would I still be at Convergent, maintaining their systems in grateful obscurity? Would I have ever realized the value of what I'd created? Probably not. Comfort breeds complacency. I'd been comfortable for too long. It took being pushed off the edge to discover I could build something even better. My phone buzzes. A potential client. A startup that's heard about my libraries. They want to discuss licensing, possibly some consulting work. I check their leadership team. No Edward Kingsley. No Yale MBAs with grand ideas about modernization. "I'd be happy to meet," I type back. "Let's discuss how I can help you build something that actually works." Because ultimately, that's what it was always about. Not the money, though the money was satisfying. Not the revenge, though the revenge was gratifying. It was about the work itself, solving problems, building systems, creating something elegant and functional and enduring. They thought they were saving $300. What they purchased was my freedom to do what I do best, on my own terms, at my own price. And that, as Edward might say if he'd learned anything, is simply good business. The fog has returned, pressing against my office window in that familiar Boston way. I turn back to my code, fingers finding their rhythm on the keyboard. Somewhere out there, in server rooms and data centers, my libraries run their quiet magic, processing transactions, managing connections, keeping the digital world spinning. All because someone decided $300 was worth more than the person who kept their infrastructure alive. Their mistake. My fortune. And the best part? This isn't the ending. It's just the beginning of what happens when you teach an engineer the true value of their work. The code keeps running, the invoices keep coming. And somewhere, in a leadership coaching session, a former CTO teaches future executives about the importance of valuing technical talent. I hope he mentions the $300. I hope he explains how such a trivial decision can cascade into millions in losses, how treating engineers as expenses rather than assets can bring down entire infrastructures. But mostly, I hope his clients are smarter than he was. Because out here in the real world, where code meets commerce, we're done being undervalued. We know what we're worth now. And we're not afraid to send the invoice. The cactus on my windowsill has flourished, sprouted offspring that I've potted and given to clients. A small reminder that good things grow when properly tended, that patience and resilience pay dividends in the end. My latest commit pushes successfully. Another improvement to the libraries that started all this. Clean code, functional code, valuable code. The Git history shows my name, my timestamp, my copyright. Clear and indisputable. I close my laptop and stretch, ready to finish the day. Tomorrow there will be more code to write, more problems to solve, more value to create. But tonight I'll go home to my apartment, pour a glass of bourbon, and watch the harbor lights shimmer in the darkness. They fired me over $300. My payback cost them $14 million. But my freedom, that's priceless.